Watch this horror story. It was a dark and stormy night as the Titanic set sail on its maiden voyage. The ship was a marvel of modern engineering, a symbol of human ingenuity and ambition. But beneath its opulent exterior lay a dark history and a tale of horror. The Titanic sailed into the North Atlantic, its passengers blissfully unaware of the danger that lurked beneath the surface. Among them was a young couple, Sarah and James, who were celebrating their honeymoon. They had heard the stories of the Titanic's ill-fated voyage, but they dismissed them as superstition and myth. As the ship sailed further into the night, the sky turned red, casting an eerie glow over the ocean. The air grew colder, and the sea became choppier. Sarah and James retired to their cabin, hoping to escape the storm and get some rest. But as they lay in bed, they heard a strange noise coming from the corridor outside their door. It sounded like whispers and murmurs, as if the ship itself was alive with the spirits of the past. Sarah and James exchanged nervous glances, wondering if they were imagining things. Suddenly, the door to their cabin swung open, revealing a figure standing in the doorway. It was a woman, dressed in an elegant gown from the early 20th century. Her hair was styled in an elaborate updo, and her eyes were wide with terror. She looked at Sarah and James with a haunted expression, as if pleading for help. Then, without warning, the woman vanished into thin air, leaving the couple shaken and confused. They tried to rationalize what they had seen, but they couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister was at play. Sarah and James decided to explore the ship, hoping to find answers. They walked through the empty corridors, their footsteps echoing in the darkness. As they reached the first-class dining room, they saw the ghostly figure of the woman they had seen earlier. She was surrounded by other spirits, all dressed in the attire of the early 20th century. The spirits were trapped in a never-ending cycle, reliving the final moments of their lives aboard the Titanic. Sarah and James were horrified by what they saw, but they were determined to help the spirits find peace. They spent the rest of the voyage researching the history of the Titanic, uncovering the tragic stories of those who had perished on that fateful night. On April 14, 1912, the Titanic struck an iceberg and sank to the bottom of the ocean, taking the lives of over 1,500 passengers and crew. As the ship descended into the icy depths, Sarah and James felt a sense of closure. They knew that the spirits of the Titanic could finally rest in peace, their stories remembered and honored. And as they watched the ship disappear into the darkness, they knew that they would never forget the horror and the tragedy of that fateful night. Hi. The Titanic, the unsinkable ship, set sail on April 10, 1912. The opulent vessel boasted luxurious accommodations, the finest dining, and unparalleled luxury. But beneath the surface of opulence and grandeur, there lay a dark history and a tale of horror. The voyage began with great fanfare as passengers boarded the ship. Among them was a young couple, Elizabeth and William, who had saved for years to afford the trip of a lifetime. They were filled with excitement as they explored the ship, taking in the grandeur of the ballrooms, the elegance of the dining rooms, and the breathtaking views from the promenade deck. As night fell, the ship sailed into the icy waters of the North Atlantic. The air grew colder, and the sea became choppier. Elizabeth and William retired to their cabin, eager to rest before the next day's adventures. But as they lay in bed, they heard a strange noise coming from the corridor outside their door. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing through the empty hallway. At first, they dismissed it as the creaking of the ship, but the sound grew louder and more distinct. Elizabeth and William exchanged nervous glances, wondering if someone was playing a prank on them. William opened the door to investigate, but the hallway was empty. He shrugged it off as their imagination playing tricks on them and closed the door, hoping to get some sleep. But the footsteps continued, growing louder and more insistent. Elizabeth and William huddled together in fear, trying to convince themselves that it was just the ship settling. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped, and an eerie silence filled the cabin. Then, without warning, the door to their cabin swung open, revealing a figure standing in the doorway. It was a woman, dressed in an elegant gown from the early 20th century. Her hair was styled in an elaborate updo, and her eyes were wide with terror. She looked at Elizabeth and William with a haunted expression, as if pleading for help. Then, as quickly as she appeared, she vanished into thin air, leaving the couple shaken and confused. Elizabeth and William tried to rationalize what they had seen, but they couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister was at play. They decided to explore the ship, hoping to find answers. As they walked through the empty corridors, they heard whispers and murmurs, as if the ship itself was alive with the spirits of the past. They reached the first-class dining room, where they saw the ghostly figure of the woman from their cabin. She was surrounded by other spirits, all dressed in the attire of the early 20th century. They were trapped in a never-ending cycle, reliving the final moments of their lives aboard the Titanic. Elizabeth and William were horrified by what they saw, but they were determined to help the spirits find peace. They spent the rest of the voyage researching the history of the Titanic, uncovering the tragic stories of those who had perished on that fateful night. On April 14, 1912, the Titanic struck an iceberg and sank to the bottom of the ocean, taking the lives of over 1,500 passengers and crew. The ship became a watery grave, a testament to the hubris of man and the power of nature. As the ship descended into the icy depths, Elizabeth and William felt a sense of closure. They knew that the spirits of the Titanic could finally rest in peace, their stories remembered and honored. And as they watched the ship disappear into the darkness, they knew that they would never forget the horror and the tragedy of that fateful night. Emily and James had always been fascinated by the mysteries of the Titanic. From the moment they won the lottery that granted them a ticket aboard the famous ship's maiden voyage, they had been consumed with curiosity about the secrets that lay within its decks. Little did they know that their quest for knowledge would lead them to the darkest corners of the Titanic, to a place where the veil between the living and the dead was thin, and the spirits of the past roamed freely. As the Titanic set sail on the evening of April 10, 1912, Emily and James stood on the deck, watching in awe as the ship glided through the water. They marveled at its grandeur, its opulence, and its sheer size. They explored the ship from top to bottom, taking in the sights and sounds of the bustling decks and the luxurious cabins. But as the night fell and the ship sailed into the icy waters of the North Atlantic, a sense of unease began to settle over them. There was something about the Titanic, something that whispered of the past and the tragedies that had taken place on its decks. Emily and James couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to the ship than met the eye. Their curiosity led them to the ship's library, where they spent hours poring over books and documents about the Titanic's history. They learned about the ship's construction, its maiden voyage, and the events that led to its tragic demise. They read about the passengers and crew, the lives lost, and the stories of survival. But there was one story that captured their attention more than any other, a story that spoke of a mysterious room on board the Titanic, a room that was said to be haunted by the spirits of the dead. The room was known as the Red Room, a small cabin tucked away in a remote corner of the ship. According to the legends, the Red Room was a place of unspeakable horror, where the spirits of the dead roamed freely. Emily and James were intrigued by the tales of the Red Room, and they were determined to find it. They spent the next few days exploring the ship, searching for any clue that would lead them to the Red Room. They questioned the crew, searched the ship's blueprints, and even consulted with a psychic who claimed to have a connection to the spirits of the Titanic. But no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't find any trace of the elusive Red Room. As the Titanic sailed further into the icy waters of the North Atlantic, Emily and James began to lose hope. They had scoured every inch of the ship, but the Red Room remained elusive. But then, on the evening of April 14th, as the ship sailed through a dense fog, they stumbled upon a hidden staircase that led to a small, unmarked door. Emily and James exchanged nervous glances as they approached the door. They could hear strange noises coming from inside, a low, mournful wail that sent shivers down their spines. But their curiosity got the better of them, and they pushed the door open. What they saw inside the red room was beyond anything they could have imagined. The walls were painted a deep, blood-red color, and the room was filled with strange symbols and eerie artifacts. In the center of the room, there was a large, ornate mirror, its surface reflecting the dim light of the room. As Emily and James approached the mirror, they saw their own reflections staring back at them. But as they looked closer, they realized that something was wrong. Their reflections were twisted and distorted, their features contorted into grotesque shapes. Suddenly, the mirror shattered into 1,000 pieces, and the room was plunged into darkness. Emily and James screamed in terror as they felt a cold, clammy hand grab their shoulders. They turned to see the ghostly figure of a woman standing behind them, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. The woman spoke in a voice that seemed to echo from the depths of the ocean. She told them the story of the Red Room, a place of darkness and despair where the spirits of the dead were trapped for eternity. She told them of the horrors that had taken place on the Titanic, of the lives lost and the souls condemned to wander the ship forever. Emily and James tried to flee, but the door to the Red Room was sealed shut, trapping them inside. They could hear the sounds of the ship groaning and creaking as it continued its journey through the icy waters. They were alone in the darkness, with only the ghostly figure of the woman for company. As the hours passed, Emily and James felt the cold grip of despair tightening around their hearts. They knew that they would never escape the Red Room, that they would be trapped there for all eternity. And as they sat huddled together in the darkness, they could hear the whispers of the dead echoing through the ship, a haunting reminder of the horrors that had taken place on that fateful night. But then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the Red Room vanished. The walls melted away, and the artifacts and symbols disappeared. Emily and James found themselves standing on the deck of the Titanic, the sun shining brightly overhead. They looked at each other in confusion, wondering if they had imagined the whole thing. But then they saw the ghostly figure of the woman standing nearby, her eyes filled with sadness. She spoke to them one last time, telling them that they had been chosen to bear witness to the horrors of the Titanic, to ensure that the world would never forget the lives lost on that fateful night. And with that, the woman disappeared, leaving Emily and James alone on the deck of the Titanic. They stood there in silence, watching as the ship continued its journey through the icy waters of the North Atlantic. And as the sun set on the horizon, casting a red glow over the water, they knew that the Titanic would forever be haunted by the spirits of the past.